At 5:32 p.m. on January 31st, Nancy Guthrie got into an Uber. Investigators confirmed that ride within the first week. They spoke to the driver, verified the route, checked every timestamp and every detail of that trip, and then nothing. No press conference mentioned it. No reporter asked what that ride revealed. Not one analyst connected what that single Saturday afternoon Uber meant for everything that came after. That ride may be the most important detail of Nancy Guthrie's last normal day that nobody has talked about. Tonight, we're going back to that Saturday. Every hour, every detail, because nothing Nancy did that day was random or unusual. Nothing deviated from her pattern. It was exactly what she did every single week, and that predictable normalcy was exactly what made her the perfect target. January 31st, Saturday afternoon in Tucson. At 5:32 p.m., Nancy Guthrie stepped out her front door and got into a rideshare. She did not drive herself. She called an Uber. That one detail matters far more than it appears on the surface. Every Uber ride creates a complete digital record in real time. Pickup location logged, destination logged, departure time logged, full route tracked from start to finish, every turn, every stop, every minute of that trip recorded automatically. At 5:32 on a Saturday afternoon, Nancy was picked up at her home in the Catalina foothills and driven to her daughter Annie's house for dinner. Investigators confirmed every part of that ride early in the investigation. They interviewed the driver directly. They cross-referenced the route data. The driver was cleared. But here's what not one reporter, not one anchor, not one analyst asked publicly in 45 days of coverage. If someone was watching Nancy Guthrie's house that Saturday afternoon, and we know with certainty that someone had been watching, they would have seen the entire sequence unfold in front of them. They would have watched that Uber pull up to her home. They would have seen Nancy walk out her front door and get in. They would have watched that car drive away down the street, and in that moment, they would have known one thing with complete certainty. She left without her own vehicle, which means at some point that night, she would have to come back the same way she left, dependent on someone else, on a schedule she did not control, arriving at a time set by another person entirely, not her choice, not her timing. Someone watching that afternoon understood exactly what that meant. She would be coming back, she would be dropped off at that same front door, and she would walk into that house completely alone. That was not a guess. That was certainty built from one observation on one Saturday afternoon. And that changes everything about how this crime was planned. Annie Guthrie's home was close by. The family had dinner together that evening. Tommaso Cioni, Annie's husband, the last known person to see Nancy alive, was there with them. Whatever they talked about that night, whatever they laughed about, whatever small ordinary moment passed between them over that dinner table, it would be the last normal conversation Nancy Guthrie ever had with the people she loved most. While Nancy sat warm and present at her daughter's table that Saturday evening, the crime that was about to shatter every life at that table had already been planned. The decisions already made, the timing already set. Not that night, not that week, weeks before. And the person responsible knew exactly where Nancy was at that moment, because that Saturday evening was not new. It was not something that started in January. It was a routine, consistent, predictable, repeating itself week after week without variation. Dinner at Annie's on Saturday evenings, home by 10, every single week. To Nancy, it felt like family, like warmth, like comfort. To someone watching from the outside, it was a schedule, and schedules can be used against the person living inside them. Now, here is the connection that not one journalist, not one analyst, not one press conference in 45 days has made publicly. The FBI asked neighbors for footage from two specific dates. January 11th, a Saturday, January 24th, a Saturday, both Saturdays, 3 weeks before the abduction, 1 week before the abduction. The FBI does not request footage from specific dates without a specific reason. They identified something on those dates, a vehicle, a movement, a pattern pattern that connected both of those Saturdays directly to the night of February 1st, and both dates were Saturdays, the same day of the week as January 31st. Let that sink in. On January 11th, a Saturday, someone observed the exact pattern they would see again on January 24th, and the exact pattern they would see again on January 31st. Nancy leaving in the afternoon, Nancy coming home at night, alone, same time, same sequence, same result, 3 Saturdays in a row without a single variation. That is not surveillance. That is confirmation. Each visit was not about discovering something new. Each visit was about verifying that what they already knew was still true, still accurate, still reliable. By January 31st, whoever was watching had already seen this exact evening play out twice before. They knew what time she left. They knew she would return without her own vehicle. They knew she would be dropped off. They knew the garage door would close. They knew she would be alone inside that house. 3 Saturdays, same pattern, same result. Every single time. That level of certainty does not happen by accident. That is someone who is not going to move until every variable had been observed and verified across multiple weeks, and by January 31st, every variable had checked out. 9:48 p.m. Tommaso pulled into Nancy's driveway. He waited 2 minutes, just long enough to make sure she got inside safely. The kind of thing a good son-in-law does without thinking twice about it. Garage door opened at 9:48. It closed at 9:50. Tommaso drove away. From anywhere nearby, from any point with a clear view of that driveway, what just happened was completely clear. Nancy Guthrie is home. She is alone. The house is sealed. For someone who had already watched this exact sequence on January 11th and January 24th, this moment carried no surprises. This was the signal, the final sign that everything had unfolded exactly as expected. The routine had completed itself a third time. Every step had proceeded precisely as it had on those 2 prior Saturdays. The only difference between this Saturday and the 2 before it was that this time they were not going to leave. Stop and picture Nancy at 9:50 that night. The garage door had just closed. The street outside was quiet. The desert was still. She had just spent the evening with her daughter, with Tommaso, with the people she loved most. She was home. She was safe. The evening had ended exactly the way countless Saturday nights before it had ended. She had no reason to feel anything other than the quiet comfort of a Saturday night closing as it always did. No warning, nothing unusual, nothing out of place, because nothing was unusual. The Uber that afternoon, routine. Dinner at Annie's, routine. The ride home with Tommaso, routine. Every detail of January 31st matched her life exactly as it had for years. Same timing, same people, same familiar warmth. That was not coincidence. That was the point. Whoever planned this needed one specific thing from Nancy Guthrie that night above everything else. They needed her to feel completely safe. Because a person who feels safe does not check the locks twice, does not lie awake listening for sounds that should not be there. A person who feels safe turns off the lights, draws the covers, and goes to sleep. Here is what January 31st tells us about this case that nobody has said out loud. The crime did not start on February 1st. It did not start with the camera going dark at 1:47 in the morning. It did not start with the 41-minute window. It did not start with the pacemaker losing its signal. It started on a Saturday afternoon when someone watched a car pull up to a house in Tucson and an 84-year-old woman get in. It continued on January 11th. It continued on January 24th. And by 9:50 on the night of January 31st, when that garage door closed for the last time, whoever planned this already had everything they needed. They had mapped her routine across 3 separate Saturdays. They had verified she came home alone every single week. They had timed every detail down to the minute. Nothing left to observe, nothing left to plan.